Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Sean O'Connell Show. Glad to have you with us for what will be a bit of a sprint today. Utah women's basketball taking on the Arizona Wildcats right here on our airwaves coming up at noon, which means pregame starts at 11:45, which means I've got about 42 minutes to entertain and enlighten you today. I will do my best in that effort. Because I am egotistical, we did not schedule a guest for today. I want you to just have to listen to me the whole time. You'll also hear from James Peterson, who's behind the glass here in our Broadway studios, on a show that is brought to you today and every single day by our friends over at Big Willie's. 1717 South Main. Big Willie's is Utah's sports bar, Salt Lake City sports bar, a perfect place to cap off a holiday season. If you need New Year's plans, Big Willie's going to have a great party going on. You're going to be looking for a place on New Year's Eve, potentially to be watching that Vegas Bowl. Big Willie's is the right spot for you. Great food, great drinks, great people. A great time will be had at Big Willie's. Tell them OC sent you. They will take extra special care of you. All right, for the second year, we have had the opening weekend of a college football playoff featuring an expanded field of 12 teams. And depending on what lens you look at it through, fortunately or unfortunately, you had some games this weekend that I think illustrated perhaps another need for a tweak. Now, I say perhaps, and I say fortunately or unfortunately, because there are people out there in the sports world who think that we should be nimble and we should be flexible and we should be careful about getting married to certain systems for too long. And there are others who are like, look, you got to give this thing time and a little bit of legs. And you didn't have that with last year, the automatic bids, the automatic buys going to the highest-ranked conference champions, allowing for Arizona State and Boise State to have first-round buys. There were people who didn't like that. Now there are people who don't like what they saw with the 5-12 matchup where the Oregon Ducks smashed James Madison 51-34. And obviously you had the Tulane-Ole Miss debacle where Ole Miss beats Tulane 41-10. Jake Retzlaff in that game, by the way, 20 of 35, 300 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But Tulane's defense couldn't stop Ole Miss, and it ends up being a demolition. Here's the thing. I don't think that it's always the right thing to do to say, well, if you lose the game, you didn't belong in the playoff in the first place. Because if you put BYU in that spot, if you put Notre Dame in that spot, if you put Vanderbilt in that spot, if you put Utah in that spot, there's also the potential, and according to Vegas, even the likelihood that whatever of those teams ended up there is also going to lose that game. Now, we want more competitive games, and you don't want to see blowouts in the first round of a playoff that is designed to find you the best team in the country and to have selected, ostensibly, the 12 best teams in the country to then participate in a mini tournament that allows you to crown an eventual champion. James Madison, they knew it coming in. The social media team knew it. The coaching staff knew it. The players in their heart of hearts probably knew it, that this is not a very much winnable game for them. You probably need the Oregon Ducks to lay an egg. See what I did there? If you're going to beat them. And Dan Lanning's too good of a coach to allow that to happen. These Oregon players are too highly compensated to allow that to happen. And so it was kind of what a lot of people thought it would be. In fact, I mean, Oregon takes the foot off the gas pedal maybe a little bit too much to where if you didn't lose or if you didn't watch this game, you thought it was close. Because it is, I mean, I guess technically it's a two-score game because 2 touchdowns and a couple of extra 2-point conversions. It wasn't as close as the final score made it look. So the debate immediately fires back up like, okay, do we need to have these group of 5 teams in. And look, I'm here for all of it. 877-353-0700 at Real OC Sports. I enjoy the discourse with the differing opinions, especially because you were at one point not so long ago, if you're a Utah fan, you were James Madison. And you were Tulane. And if you listen too much to certain people who keep telling you that Utah is broke, you might still be in some conversations. That's not me, by the way. I'm not disseminating that opinion or information. Here's the thing. You can't just dismiss these teams that have earned their way under the current criteria into the dance. And I don't think it's actually good practice that if you don't like the results of the rules that you put in place, that you just change the rules. That's a very dictatorial practice. That's very much bully behavior. It's like anyone who's taller than this can ride the ride. And then the tall kid comes on, no, I don't want you on the ride, though. But what do you mean? It says if I'm taller than, I have to be this tall to ride the ride. I'm this tall to ride the ride, so let me on the ride. No, I don't want you there. Why? I can't really put my finger on it. Because you meet the criteria. You are tall enough to ride the ride. I just don't want you on the ride. That's where Tulane was this year, and that's where James Madison was this year. And look, I'm willing, 100% willing, to re-examine whether or not that was the right thing. But here's the deal. You made the rules, and just because the ACC stunk it up, and just because the ACC rules and tiebreakers didn't provide you with a conference champion that was justifiably higher ranked than a really good James Madison mid-major or a really good Tulane mid-major, that's not on those teams. That's on the ACC and the system in the ACC and the system that the ACC participated in and agreed to for the 12-team expanded college football playoff. But you are going to get a change now. It is going to happen. It's going to happen this offseason because the powers that be don't want these teams to be the powers. They don't want Tulane and James Madison muddling up the playoff. And probably the best point and argument for that correction, and you might call it an overcorrection, is the acknowledgement that the system is different now, the timing is important, and the rule set of college sports and college football especially is not the same as the one that existed when the overachievers of Boise State, TCU, Utah, Hawaii that one special year were busting into the party for the big dogs. And look, we saw mixed results in those cases. You remember when Hawaii played Georgia in a BCS game? The Colt Brennan team, rest in peace, Colt Brennan. The Colt Brennan team that was just like an offensive powerhouse.
That was the year he broke the NCAA record, right? For
I believe
touchdowns.
So. I believe so. But then they went up against Georgia, and it was like, oh, wait.
Was that Peach Bowl, too? Like, basically a road game?
It was not just a road game. It was a fly across the ocean, go into the backyard of the SEC Power type road game.
Yeah, it's not as if this was the Fiesta Bowl where it's a much shorter flight from Hawaii to basically a West Coast venue. They also had to go all the way across the country once they got to the mainland. Yeah.
I think that during the fall, or that's like an 8-hour time difference, if I'm not mistaken. It's either 7 or 8 hour time difference from local time in Hawaii. And look, if you played that on a neutral site, on an aircraft carrier, they probably are also losing that game. But it just aggravated the problem.
As long as they have enough footballs, because they keep kicking them in the ocean like that.
You might. There's a lot of ways that we have. There's examples you can bust out and just say, yeah, that's why you don't invite the overachiever to the big kid party. Look what happened with Hawaii.
Yeah.
And then you could say, whoa. Did you not see Boise State beat Oklahoma? Did you not see Utah beat Alabama? Did you not see those things? And then there's always the counter argument. Well, yeah, but what about the other time? What about when TCU made it all the way to the national championship game and it didn't? It's like,
well, hold on, they were Power 4 team at that time.
That's
Come on
true,
now.
they were.
Power 5 at that time.
You don't want to just keep moving the goalposts to make it harder and harder for these mid-major teams. But those goalposts have already been moved in a way that might make it so that these results that we saw this past weekend are all but guaranteed. And the goalposts I'm talking about there are the goalposts of funding. And I cannot tell you how much I loathe the idea that that's the primary discussion point now with virtually all competitive conversations around college athletics. You can almost not have a conversation about who should win, who's going to win, which conference champion is going to surprise us. We cannot extricate the almighty greenback, the dollar, from any of those conversations anymore. Even when you're talking about the mid-majors, we have to be like, all right, well, I think that James Madison probably has better support than some of the other teams that are in their same category. I think Tulane found something that's hard for other people to find, that Utah State maybe can't find right now. And I don't even know if those things are true, but we just make those assumptions because we almost can't wrap our head around the idea that there can be a team united enough, a scheme good enough, a coach with the leadership abilities to overachieve not only size, not only speed, not only depth deficits, but also payroll deficits. I hate it, right? We talked about how far is too far last week with the betting thing. How far is too far on the NIL influence over competitiveness? We've reached that threshold, okay? We've seen it in glaring, stark relief here in our own backyard, where the positive side of things is now you have two Big 12 teams, two power conference teams in our state, 45 minutes apart from one another, but one of them had to kind of pull up the bootstraps and grind their way into the position that they're in, and the other one was able to buy their way in, and the results are what they are. It's kind of like, well, much like it always is, college athletics is a metaphor for life. At the end of the day, that person with the good job, with the dream job, it kind of doesn't matter how they got there, right? If you did it grinding your way, working late nights, waiting tables, mopping floors, paying your way through school, proving yourself as an intern, climbing the corporate ladder, and getting that CEO job after 25 years in the company, cool, wonderful. The American dream. Functionally, it's actually not different from the perspective of 99.9% of the people outside of your tiny little sphere, whether you did it that way or whether mommy and daddy purchased your way into every good school, every good internship, every promotion, and now you're still in that spot. You're still where you belong, or you're still where society has put you. Whether you did it the hard way or quote unquote the easy way, and it's probably unfair just to call it the easy way because there's a lot of toil and hard work that goes into being financially successful. And if you want to hand out those finances, if you want to cut checks, and we're going to play you some sound here in just a minute that's going to make you sick to your stomach, that allows for somebody else to get, to skip the line, that's fine. That you get to make those decisions. But to circle back to the main point here, what we're talking about is a college football playoff system that was put in place with some parameters designed almost specifically to avoid litigation that we saw play out in 2025 in a way that, unfortunately, is kind of detrimental to the whole thing. Kind of detrimental to the whole expanded college football playoff. So they're going to have to make this tweak again. And they're going to, because we saw a drastic example where the ACC failed to deliver, and the result of that was 2 Group of 5 champions who are not even top 15 teams, not top 10 teams like Boise State was last year. We're talking top 20 to 25 teams are now being thrown into the mix with the top 12 teams in the country. So it's a couple of guys that are pretty darn good and they're respectable overachievers, but everyone has agreed to this point not among the 12 best. There's nobody in the country that was trying to make the case that Tulane or James Madison was among the best teams in the country. Instead, we had to embrace the idea that even though you're not one of the best 12 teams in the country, even though you have exactly zero chance in our minds, our collective consciousness, of winning the national championship, we have to invite you, we have to put you into this tournament because we have established a rule set previously to avoid you getting mad and throwing a tantrum and potentially suing us because you don't have access to the college football playoff. We have to put you in because of what the ACC did, screwing it up for everyone, because it is such a drastic example by having 2 teams in, not just the 1 automatic qualifier, which, by the way, if we had 1 automatic qualifier last year, even though they ended up getting a first-round bye in Boise State's case, the rules went back and they changed it. If this year you had the 1 automatic qualifier and you had 1 first-round game, where it was just the James Madison versus Oregon, or it was just the Tulane Ole Miss, everyone would have shut up about it and just be like, oh, yeah, all right. Well, quit crying Notre Dame, quit crying BYU, quit crying Vanderbilt, quit crying Texas, quit crying Utah. We can invite the top 20 team to the party because we have to do it. But now that there's 2, and now that it's an extreme example, the reaction is going to be extreme. And so the criteria are going to be made excessively tough. We're going to overcompensate as a college football playoff committee. The rule makers are going to be like, you know what? Never mind. No automatic access for the Group of 5. Or any Group of 5 access is going to have to be made automatic by a top 10 ranking or by an undefeated record, which I'm on board with, but it is the nature of decision-making in the human experience that when you see something extreme at one end, you try to balance it out with something extreme at another end. So even as the observations are made, and I think astutely so, across sports media, social media, whatever, where people are like, look, the Utah story is a great story, the Boise State story is a great story, but those happened in a different time and place. You probably don't get to do that anymore. And honestly, I think we'll take that Fiesta Bowl team as an example. I'm trying to think of how many guys after the 10-2 Liberty Bowl season on that Utah roster, how many guys would have remained on the Utah roster for an undefeated run to the Fiesta Bowl. After that, if we were living in today's world, right? Alex Smith is gone after he gets pulled off the bench because of a Brett Elliott injury and helps a team to a 10-win season, shows his incredible athleticism, shows his decision-making ability, the speed of his processing as a quarterback. Alex Smith is being offered, in today's world, $1.5 to $3.5 million to go play for a power school. And again, in this world, Utah's not part of that, right? So Utah has to try to overcompensate and be like, well, we'll match the $1.5 million. Stay here. And maybe Alex is just like, all right, I'll do it. All right. Well, now what about Chris K. Moyatu, who played a decade in the league, who was the scariest dude I've ever been around, who was an All-American offensive guard, who was massively important to establishing the physicality, the tone of what Utah football was. Now you've paid all your money to Alex Smith to keep him there. Is Chris Kimoyatsu coming back? Well, all right, probably not. I think maybe you hold on to Marty Johnson. Maybe not. Maybe you hold on to Quinton Ganther. Maybe not. You probably don't get to hold on to Paris Warren and Steve Savoy. Or if you do, you only have one. Well, that's okay. If one leaves, then John Madsen takes on a bigger role. Travis Latondras takes on a bigger role the next year. Okay, sure. Maybe it works. We haven't even talked about the defensive side of the ball yet. Sione Pua, NFL player, captain on NFL teams. You think he's staying? Jonathan Fanene played a decade in the NFL. You think he's still here? Eric Weddle, I hope.
I mean,
freshman All-America, right, at Utah. Unbelievable season. Freshman All-American, and every team in the country calling him, including all of those schools that overlooked him coming out of high school.
Yeah,
UCLA,
from
USC,
Southern California. You don't think those teams wouldn't be calling him? Like, come on.
So you have to, when you look at the college football playoff as it is now, you do have to ask yourself a question. Well, do we think those Cinderella stories are even possible? Do we believe that what we saw on multiple occasions from TCU and Hawaii and Boise State and Utah, do we think that is even possible in this era? Because these guys don't stay together. Like Tulane had a good year last year, right? And they added a guy who was going to be a Power 5 starter this year to be their quarterback in a very strange and complicated manner, which I don't want to get into because I really, it's the whole storyline kind of grosses me out, and I'm not trying to assign guilt or innocence to anyone there, but just the idea of the whole thing is terrible. So Tulane maybe is an outlier that we could see that continue because Tulane had a good year last year.
You got to keep in mind they're losing their coach to Florida, so a lot of their good players are probably following him to Florida.
So next year Tulane ain't there, right? It's a valid question to ask now whether or not we need to actually do the Super League thing now. We need to separate it now. I would be far more interested in Tulane, James Madison, Utah State, UNLV, Boise State, if we had a true promotion and relegation type situation, which we know is not a possibility because no one will ever sign off on it. But if they had their own thing that they were competing for, to where we actually looked at JMU and we said, what? And they came from the lower level, so it's awful to try to send them back, but to say, look, you guys, we're proud of you. What you've done is incredible, but you don't actually belong at this big kid table. And we now have, the game to show us, and we now have an offseason coming where everything that made you this is going to be plucked from you. And the same is true for you, Tulane. And the same is true for every school that is even remotely near that conversation. And that's a tough thing because I don't want it to be the case. I don't want it to be even though it in a lot of ways benefits Utah, in a lot of ways benefits BYU, in more ways benefits BYU. I don't want it to be where anytime you earn something as a team, as a university, as a football program, as a school, if you're not already bellied up to this negotiation, this big, we all are the cool guys here, the Knights of the Round Table, and you hope that BYU and Utah have a place at that table eventually. That's why this private equity money is coming in, to keep you at that table. I don't want it to be that way. But we saw games this weekend in college football that kind of make it undeniable for me that the system no longer favors David versus Goliath in any sort of way. Because now, the system we live in now Goliath can just buy the sling from David. And then David's like, all right, I'm still going to try to fight you, but the thing that made it so I could beat you is gone. That's a tough world to be living in if you are David. If you're Goliath, it's wonderful.
Yeah, Goliath is using a sling to knock David out. Okay.
Well, you don't even have to. Like,
no, you don't have to use it. But
Goliath doesn't even have to use the sling, but it's just like you take the sling away, right? To extend the hypothetical I'm talking about. If you're the Goliath of whatever USC or UCLA or Stanford or Oregon or whatever, Washington, that somehow comes in and plucks like a young Eric Weddle from the Utah football roster, to where, all right, like now that weapon is not available for this David to hurt us, the Goliaths, so we don't even have to use it necessarily.
Yeah,
he doesn't even have to have a great year for us. We just, like, you can't let David have that. You can't let Urban Meyer and Kyle Whittingham know how to use this.
Yeah.
If I can take Alex Smith off of this roster, and Urban Meyer has to do it now with a 17-year-old Brian Johnson, he'd have been good, but he's not undefeated good. It's just, and by the way, it's not just the mid-majors that have to deal with this. It's also the majors that don't have the same status as Ohio State, Georgia, Texas Tech, Oregon, Ole Miss. And it circles back around to what? Unfortunately, again, James, money.
And that's why if I'm Brett Yormark in the Big 12, I'm resisting the Super League as long as possible. Even if you don't agree with the way the field shook out this year with 2 group of 5 teams, you're saying, no, those teams belong. You're going to bat for those teams because in the back of your mind, you're like, we might as well be some of those teams.
Well, that's you bring up an interesting point, because it's almost you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, if you're Brett Yormark in this case. Because if you say, hey, we put these rules in place for a reason. You have to be this tall to ride the ride. We decided that for a reason. There's actual good logic behind this. And we want them here, right? It makes sense for Brett Yormark to say that, because he's got at least half of the conference that are kind of like, they're not much better off than the 2 teams we're talking about.
They're a higher level than those teams, but in the eyes of the powers that be, they're not really.
Like, I promise you, if it was Oklahoma State in the college football playoff, the reaction is the same, and the score is even worse. And if Colorado made it into the college football playoff, whatever, right? Now, if you're Brett Yormark, you probably one part of you has to campaign for the underdog, but also if you're Brett Yormark, you have to be looking at it and saying, like, man, I had 2 teams that were right there within striking distance, especially BYU. When I look at how JMU played and I look at how Tulane played, there's not a person in America who thinks BYU would not have fared better. Would they have won those games? Probably not. Maybe. But would they have won those, or would they have fared better than JMU and better than Tulane? 100% yes. So if you're Brett Yormark, you're like, one half of you has to be the champion of the underdog, and the other half of you has to be like, no, get these dudes out of here so I get 2 teams in instead of 1. I want BYU in there. And by the way, Notre Dame is saying the same thing, and Vanderbilt is saying the same thing. And if you're an insane Utah fan, you're probably saying the same thing. I saw them on Twitter saying Utah beats both of these teams. People were saying that on Friday night about the Oklahoma-Alabama game. Utah beats both of these teams. Look, the Utah we saw most of the season, perhaps. The Utah we saw give 500 yards up in passing and then 500 yards up in running, and maybe not. But the point stands. If you're Brett Yormark, you're going, yes, let the underdog in. But also, no, keep him out so that my medium dog, we're not the top dog, but my second best team, I want them in.
The most medium good team.
It just is it's a strange place. And by the way, it's a strange place you only have to tolerate for the next, whatever it is, month and a half, because then the system's going to change again. They're going to throw all the Yahtzee dice into that little cup. They're going to shake it up. They're going to spill it out. And they're going to be like, oh, look at that. No more room for the group of 5 teams. Or the group of 5 teams have to be undefeated or whatever.
Or they only get one, whatever.
And that's probably the most correct solution. And it makes me ill to say that because you were this team a decade ago.
But you think about it, OC, other than the last 2 years in the expanded playoff, every time a group of 5 team, back then it was non-BCS teams, got to play in the New Year's Six Bowls, the BCS Bowls, they were undefeated. You didn't have 1-loss, 2-loss teams in.
Right.
So I don't think that it would be holding them to an unfair standard, a different unfair standard. You're holding them to the standard that we've always held them to.
The standard that Utah and Boise State and Hawaii,
TCU had one year where they, for a weird reason, they matched them up with Boise State. But yeah.
All right, we got to take a break here. We only have one more segment left, and I'm going to give you some sound. Arizona State fans celebrating because Kenny Dillingham not going anywhere. And then Kenny Dillingham stood in front of some cameras, and I don't know how the celebration continued after that. We'll give you the sound next. It's the Sean O'Connell Show on ESPN 700 and 92.1 FM. Sean O'Connell Show, ESPN 792.1 FM. We got like 6 or so minutes left before we send it over to Utah women's basketball. I want to play you this sound. Arizona State got an extension done with Kenny Dillingham over the weekend. There was a lot of conversation about him potentially being the next Michigan head coach. Good on Arizona State, and also good on Kenny Dillingham because he didn't actually increase his own pay that much. He's still at like $7.5 million a year, which is well below any kind of Big Ten standard. He did increase his assistant salary pool to $11 million per year, which is way up there. That is like top 10 in the country. So he clearly wants to keep his assistants happy. That is, in his mind, the key to sustaining some of the success. And then, of course, he meets with the media. And they talk about kind of like, congrats, coach, what's next? What do you need to do to get over the hump? And this is going to make you sick as a college football fan to hear a head coach have to do this on air.
We need to find one of these really rich people in this city to step up and stroke a check, and I'll do everything I can to make you the most famous person in the city, right? That's really what we need. We need one person. We live in Phoenix, Arizona. You're telling me there's not one person who could stroke a $20 million check right now? There is somebody out here who can. There's somebody who can. There's somebody. And, like, other people are going to sacrifice to be here. Somebody step up and be that dude to say, holy cow, what completely changed it? This person. There's somebody out there that's going to listen to this, that's going to get it forwarded it. If you know somebody who can do it, forward this message to somebody. Somebody can step up and completely take this place from the direction it's going to holy cow. And it's right here in the city.
Look, I love Kenny Dillingham. Genuinely, I think he's the kind of coach you want your kid playing for. He's not wrong about anything he said there, but that's a gross thing to have to say, especially when you've just signed an extension, especially when it's a celebratory moment for yourself, for your family, for everyone who's ever been a part of your success. Then you immediately have to go and say, can I please have a rich person give me some money? Imagine, James, being a head coach. This is his dream job. He gets extended in his actual dream job in the neighborhood he grew up in. And then you have to go, could some rich guy please make this easier for me? Because that's the world we live in now. And how silly does it sound? You're telling me there's someone out there who can't stroke a $20 million check? No, of course. Phoenix has got 100 people that can do that for you. But at least 99 of those 100 people are going to hear you say that and be like, why would I? $20 million for what, Kenny Dillingham? $20 million for the potential to go see 6 home games. And let's be realistic, I'll probably actually, if I'm that $20 million check writer, I'll probably go to like 3 of the road games. And then, by the way, I got to do it again next year. Also, you can tell people I'm generous.
He's going to make him famous. Did you hear that? I'll make you famous.
If you're not already deeply emotionally invested in the success of Arizona State football, you're not writing that check. And if you are already invested deeply emotionally in the success of Arizona State football, you're already writing those checks. So to do it again or to do it more is probably something that they've asked you every single year, and you've probably already said no to, like, look, my multi-million-dollar company, my billion-dollar company is already giving you this much. Don't ask me for more. I loathe the idea that someone as good at their job, as exciting to listen to, had to go out there, felt a need to go out there and beg on camera for someone to please, please, please help us keep up. Yuck. Arizona State, you're in the same world that BYU and Utah are in. You got to get out of the Big 12 conference because your television contract ain't big enough, so your coach has to go beg for it. And they did a good job keeping him there. But keeping him there without the extra $20 million, according to him, ain't going to be as effective. And he's right. But I hate having to listen to it. And you should too as a sports fan. It's the reality where we live, but we don't want to live here.
And for the school, when you pony up money to keep your coach, this should be a flex of flexing our financial resources. Instead, the coach is having to give a dose of reality to the public that, hey, we still need more.
Imagine if Kalani Sitake, after his extension was announced, stood in front of cameras and was just like, also I need $20 million, please. Crumble guy, Built Bar, Swig, can somebody give me $20 million? All of us would just be trashing him. Yikes. All right. It's a short show today, which means we are done now. We're going to turn you over to Utah women's basketball versus the Arizona Wildcats, 2 9-win teams squaring off. Tyson and company are going to take it from here. Thanks for listening. We got a regular show tomorrow, and then we're off the rest of the Christmas week with the classic Kyle Whittingham Utah football games. Thanks for listening to this little sprint show today. 11 a.m. tomorrow. We're doing it big. It's the Sean O'Connell Show on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM.